You've been lied to about Jewish DNA. That might sound like an accusation, but it's really an invitation. Because what you think you know about the Jewish people, their ancient roots, and their supposed bloodline purity, is likely an illusion crafted more by politics than by science. What if I told you that the story of Jewish ancestry isn't a straight line from Abraham to modern-day Israel, but a twisting branching web that crosses continents, empires, and centuries of human migration? Let's ask the question that few dare to voice aloud. What if the very idea of a single Jewish ethnicity is a modern myth? A comforting simplification constructed long after the genetic truth was buried beneath layers of historical trauma, theological agendas, and national identities. And yet deep within ourselves, within the double helix of human DNA, remains an unbroken chain of ancestry. It whispers secrets older than language, older than Torah, scrolls older even than the kingdom of Israel itself. DNA doesn't lie. It doesn't obey the borders drawn by kings or the genealogies written by scribes. It remembers everything: the invasions, the intermarriages, the exiles, the lost tribes. So we begin a journey not just through time, but into the bloodstream of a people. We will follow the clues encoded in chromosomes, the silent witnesses to every migration, every alliance, every survival. Along the way, you'll see how modern science has become the unexpected archaeologist of faith, digging up answers once believed unreachable. This is not about proving or disproving religion. It's about asking a deeper question: what hidden history pulses through the veins of the Jewish people, and why was it concealed for so long? Stay with me until the end, and you'll uncover truths that might upend everything you thought you knew. Because this is not just a genetic story, it's a sacred mystery written in the body of a nation. Imagine Abraham, the patriarch of monotheism, standing beneath a desert sky. Tradition says he came from Ur of the Chaldees, modern-day Iraq. But what happens when you trace that origin not through scripture, but through strands of mitochondrial DNA? What if that legendary journey wasn't the only one that defined the Jewish people? The story of Jewish genetic roots begins in the cradle of civilization, but it does not stay there. After Abraham, the early Hebrews migrated into Egypt, where centuries of captivity left their mark not only on their culture and memory, but perhaps on their genes as well. Egyptian influence wasn't just in architecture and language, it flowed through the bloodlines of those enslaved and later liberated. From there, the migrations became more turbulent. After the Exodus, the Israelites entered Canaan, but the region was never isolated. Canaan was a crossroads, a battlefield of empires: Hittites from the north, Philistines from the sea, Assyrians from the east. Every conquest brought not just destruction, but genetic blending. Intermarriage, captivity, and exile were not rare exceptions, they were historical constants. The Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE was a turning point. Thousands of Jews were deported to Babylon, now Iraq, and parts of Iran. There, a deep cultural and possibly genetic exchange occurred. Some Jews returned to Judea, but many stayed, setting the foundation for what would become the Persian Jewish communities. Then came Alexander the Great. Greek conquest left a profound Hellenistic imprint across the ancient Near East, and Jewish populations spread through the Mediterranean. Greek-speaking Jewish communities flourished in Alexandria, Antioch, and beyond. Once again, genetics likely followed trade marriage and the rhythms of diaspora life. The Roman Empire scattered the Jews even further. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE catalyzed waves of forced migration. Jews resettled in Rome, Spain, North Africa, and later into Europe. Over time, distinct Jewish communities began to form Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, each shaped by its own landscape, language, and host culture. But this diversity, while evident in history, has often been hidden or collapsed into the myth of unity. And yet through all of these upheavals, a thread remained. Despite exile after exile, Jewish communities retained core cultural identifiers, laws, rituals, stories. These preserved a sense of belonging even as the biological lineages behind that identity continued to diversify. So what happens when you overlay this historical journey with a genetic map? You get something astonishing. The Jewish people are not one origin story, they are many. A network of migrations, reroutings, and survivals that defies the simplicity of a single narrative. And that's the point. The ancient journey of the Jews wasn't a straight line, it was a mosaic. And every piece of that mosaic is encoded in blood and bone in the way modern Jews carry within them the hidden memory of Babylon, Egypt, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now we descend deeper into the cells, the chromosomes, the silent archives of the human body. Because history is often rewritten, erased, or mythologized. But DNA, it remembers everything. Let's talk about haplogroups, the great branches on the genetic family tree. These groupings trace humanity's ancient migrations across continents and millennia. Among Jewish populations, several haplogroups emerge with surprising frequency, and each tells a story that history books have often left out. One of the most important is haplogroup J, especially J1 and J2. These lineages are ancient, rooted in the Levant and Mesopotamia, and are commonly found among modern Jewish men, especially among the Kohanim, the priestly class. The presence of J1 is sometimes linked to a Middle Eastern origin, possibly echoing the Abrahamic tradition. But here's the twist: J1 also appears widely in Arab populations. The implication: Jews and Arabs, often seen as historic rivals, share a deep ancestral link that predates religion, nations, and war. Then there's E1b1b, another significant haplogroup commonly found in North Africa and the Near East. It likely entered the Jewish gene pool during periods of contact with Egyptians and Berbers, especially among Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews. This genetic signature challenges the myth of a purely Semitic identity and introduces a more Mediterranean Afro-Asiatic dimension to Jewish ancestry. Ashkenazi Jews, descendants of the medieval Jewish communities in Central and Eastern Europe, show a fascinating mixture. Around 40–60% of their ancestry can be traced to Middle Eastern origins. But the rest, it comes from European sources, possibly conversions, marriages, or the long shadow of diaspora adaptation. Some studies suggest a maternal lineage that is heavily European, while the paternal line remains more Middle Eastern. This asymmetry hints at the complexity of survival, where women in host societies may have joined Jewish communities over generations. Another intriguing piece of the puzzle is haplogroup R1a, common among Eastern Europeans, but also found among Ashkenazi Levites. Its presence has led researchers to question whether some Jewish priestly castes emerged from local populations who adopted Judaism centuries ago. Again, this suggests integration, not isolation. What about mitochondrial DNA passed down from mother to child? Among Ashkenazi Jews, 4 maternal lineages, often referred to as the founder mothers, account for a large percentage of modern descendants. And yet genetic analysis shows that these women were not from the Levant. Their DNA points instead to ancient Europe, possibly Italy, or even prehistoric France. That means a large portion of today's Jewish population descends from European women who joined Jewish communities long ago. And finally, there's the genetic bottleneck effect. Many Jewish populations, particularly Ashkenazi, passed through dramatic periods of decline, plagues, persecution, exile, followed by population rebounds. This left a unique genetic imprint with high frequencies of certain traits, including both beneficial and harmful mutations. It's one reason why genetic testing is so common among Jewish families today. In this genetic tapestry, we find no single origin, no pure line. Instead, we find convergence, Middle Eastern roots, fused with European, Persian, and African threads. Not a single river, but a delta. Not one tribe, but many branches of the same ancient tree. So far, you followed the path from Ur to Babylon, traced haplogroups from the Levant to Europe. But now, we reach the most controversial chapter in the genetic story of the Jewish people, the puzzle pieces that don't fit the standard narrative. Let's begin in Persia, modern-day Iran. Genetic research has found striking similarities between Persian Jewish communities and non-Jewish Iranians. This is more than just geographic coincidence. Remember, the Babylonian exile ended when Cyrus the Great, a Persian king, allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem. But not all of them did. Many stayed integrating deeply with Persian society while retaining religious identity. Over centuries, these Jews developed a unique genetic profile that reflects not only Semitic roots, but also a rich admixture with ancient Iranian populations. The Persian thread in Jewish DNA is real and long ignored in simplified Middle Eastern origin myths. Next, let's journey north into the Caucasus Mountains, where another chapter unfolds the Khazar hypothesis. This theory, long debated and often politicized, suggests that a Turkic people called the Khazars converted to Judaism en masse around the 8th or 9th century CE. Geneticists have examined this theory with fresh data, and while it's not as sweeping as early proponents believed, there are indeed Caucasus-related gene markers present in many Eastern European Jewish communities, markers not easily explained by a purely Levantine origin. So what does this mean? Likely it confirms partial truth. Some groups within the Khazar Confederation may have converted, intermarried, or merged with existing Jewish populations migrating into the region. Jewish communities in Georgia, Dagestan, and Crimea still echo this forgotten legacy. Their DNA, rich with Caucasian ancestry, challenges the narrow view of a linear Semitic descent. And then there's Greece, not just as a colonial power, but as a genetic contributor. Jewish populations in Thessaloniki, for instance, were once among the most vibrant in the world. Greek and Hellenistic genetic imprints, especially in maternal DNA, suggest centuries of intermingling. These communities were often fully bilingual, bicultural, and by all genetic accounts, biologically blended. What emerged wasn't dilution, but a deepening, a Jewish identity layered over a Hellenistic framework. Meanwhile, Jews in Spain, North Africa, and Yemen carry completely different genetic blends. Sephardic Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1492 show strong Iberian ancestry. Mizrahi Jews in Iraq and Syria display more ancient Semitic and Persian DNA. And Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, show genetic links not only to ancient Jews, but to local East African populations, proving that Jewish identity was carried, adopted, and interwoven across geography and ethnicity. Every group adapted, absorbed, and transformed. Every population left its trace, not only in names and customs, but in genetic code. And yet the thread of continuity is undeniable. Despite different facial features, skin tones, and regional expressions, these groups share markers that trace back to a common ancestral core, most often centered in the Near East. But that shared core does not erase the rest. It doesn't cancel the Persian strands, the Greek undertones, or the Khazar echoes. Instead, it reveals what has long been hidden. Jewish identity was never meant to be bloodline purity. It was survival through adaptation. And now, with science confirming the historical reality of that mixture, we see not contradiction, but completion. A people whose strength came not from isolation, but from resilience, flexibility, and sacred memory. And now comes the question that science cannot answer, but your soul must face. If Jewish DNA is a mosaic Middle Eastern Persian Greek, European Caucasian, then what does it mean to be a Jew? For centuries, identity was protected by story, by ritual, by law. A covenant written not in nucleotides but in fire and stone. But what happens when the symbols of purity, the idea of an unchanged people, dissolve under the microscope? What happens when the DNA of a modern Jew traces to a Persian merchant, a Roman widow, a Khazar noblewoman, or a Berber tribesman? This isn't dilution, it's revelation. Because far from weakening Jewish identity, the genetic story only reinforces what the Torah and the prophets always hinted at, that the covenant was never about flesh alone. The Exodus was not about bloodline purity, but about liberation memory and the formation of a sacred people through trial and transformation. Genetics now tells us that identity is not a single line, it is a braided cord. The Jewish people are not an island, but a net stretched across time catching fragments of Babylonian wisdom, Persian courage, European survival, and African resilience. The DNA doesn't contradict faith, it deepens it, reminding us that chosenness was never racial. It was always spiritual. But there's more. Because this revelation doesn't just reshape how Jews see themselves, it challenges how the world thinks about race, nation, and religion. If the Jewish people are genetically diverse yet spiritually united, then what does that say about modern obsessions with purity and borders? Ask yourself if DNA shows we are mixtures of ancient tribes, enemies turned allies, slaves, and emperors. Then what is nationalism? What is religious exclusion? What does it mean to claim us and them when our very bodies are built from both? The Jewish story once imagined as narrow is revealed to be vast. It is a story of survival by transformation, of memory carried in ritual and in genes, of a people who crossed deserts and empires, adapting without vanishing. In light of these discoveries, maybe identity is not about sameness, but about commitment. Maybe being Jewish is not about who your mother's mother's mother was, but about which stories you carry, which prayers you whisper, which history you choose to protect. And so we end this journey with a paradox. The more we learn about the diversity of Jewish DNA, the more we understand what unity really means. Science didn't dismantle the myth. It refined it. It showed us that the Jewish people were not chosen because they were the same, but because they could endure transform and still remember who they were meant to be. You've seen the maps. You've read the code. But this is only the surface of the truth. The deeper layers still wait for those brave enough to keep digging. Now ask yourself one final question. What hidden histories live inside you?